name's Michael. I'm the creator of the online store called Bazaar, where you can find mugs, t-shirts, tote bags with inspiring slogans on them aimed at personal development, where you'll also find clothing and accessories with unique, unusual, sometimes quirky designs on them, also created by me. Today's topic for this video is dealing with emotions, or in the psychotherapy field, you might call that emotion regulation. This is a fundamental, a basic task of a therapist, and what many people will seek therapy for. Aside from therapy, however, it's a basic task of our life. It's central to our everyday existence, and having a relationship with our emotions and being able to deal with them is something we all have to do, whether we're a therapist or seeking therapy or not. So I thought I would offer some thoughts on this, because I've given a lot of thought over a long period of time. And where I want to start very briefly is to acknowledge what emotions basically are. They're fundamental to our everyday life. They evolved, our brains and our bodies evolved to have emotions as mammals, as a way to adapt to our environment and to adapt to the social dimensions of our environment. They serve a purpose. They're not incidental. They're not just something we happen to have as we go along life. They're key to our very survival and our adaptation in everyday life. Even if we don't like the feeling of our emotions, if they're unpleasant or unwanted, that doesn't mean they're a mistake, that we shouldn't be feeling them. Feelings like anger or jealousy, sadness, are not a mistake. They can sometimes become amplified and become overwhelming. They can sometimes lead us to do things that cause problems, but fundamentally they're not a mistake. So let's start with that basic idea. We have to deal with them one way or the other. Whatever we think about them, they're there. There is a misconception, I think, about what therapists primarily do in regard to emotions. I don't think most therapists would agree to this, but some probably would, that the main problem that human beings have with our emotions is that we suppress them. We're out of touch with them. We don't know what they are. And that the process of therapy is to help us access them, feel them, understand them, and live with them. Yes, I'd say that's half of the truth. It's not the whole truth, though. The other half is that the problem isn't simply that we suppress our emotions and we're out of touch with them. It's that they run our lives. We're overwhelmed by them. Our lives are dominated by powerful feelings that we can't seem to deal with. I recently saw somebody acknowledging that emotional constipation is a problem, suppressing emotions. But an equal problem is emotional incontinence, which I thought was a rather humorous metaphor that points to something that I found very true. So we have emotions, and sometimes we suppress them, and sometimes they overwhelm us. What I want to propose today is a little bit of a structure to think about it. If we're thinking about this, there's like stages in our relationship with emotions. And I'll just name the stages and then describe them a little bit. First, fusion, then differentiation. Then we go one of two ways: dissociation or integration. I'm sure there are more complex models or stage ways to look at emotions, but I find that this is a workable, brief way to look at it. And this notion of fusion, differentiation, dissociation, and integration, we can think about in terms of biological processes. If we think about the evolution of life, it started as a single cell organism. It multiplied, divided, there were a lot of single celled organisms. And then they were differentiated, right? And at some point they got together and made a multicellular organism. Then that multicellular organism evolved, and the kinds of cells that it produced and what those cells did began to differentiate into different functions. Some were for the nervous system, some were for the circulatory system, some for the digestive system, or one for motor functions. Right? So all of these things differentiated, but they integrated into one single organism. They all served the whole. Think about something that would, and so this is, I would propose, also what happens to us on a psychological or cognitive level, that things are fused, one undifferentiated thing, they become separate, then they can become dissociated or integrated. On a biological level, an example of dissociative process, it's not integrated, might be like a cancer cell. It's differentiated from the whole, it's apart from it, but it hasn't integrated. It's not serving the function of the whole. It's undermining it on its own. So, on a psychological level, when we're fused, we're identified with our emotions. There's not me here and my emotion is something I'm having. My emotion is having me. It is me. I'm consumed by it. There's no reflection. There's no particular acknowledgement of it, separate from a feeling of self. It takes over. And what tends to happen when that's true is the impulses that the emotion provokes or gives rise to tend to be acted on immediately. There's no reflective distance to notice it. So the first step then is differentiation, where we're no longer identified with our emotion. We notice it, we're feeling it, but it's not us. We're having it. We're having an emotion rather than an emotion is having us. And in that kind of psychological gap, we have some time and some freedom from an automatic, compulsive acting on our impulses. We can suspend that impulse, perhaps have other choices. I think this is a great evolutionary development, an important part of our cognitive development, our emotional development, is that we can notice our emotions and not immediately be overwhelmed and compelled to act on them. But something else can happen. If those emotions are painful, or if they're perceived to be unacceptable, we can dissociate from them, which means it's not only that we're not identified with them, but we try to get rid of them. We try to ignore them, try to pretend that they don't exist. We submerge them in our unconscious. They're still in our mind, they're still in our brains, they're still happening, but out of our conscious awareness because we don't want to know. This is what's, what we call suppressing emotions. And there are consequences for this, just as there's consequences for a cancer cell that carries on growing without being integrated into the whole organism. We can project this onto other people. We can see this emotion, this quality in other people and react to it, hate it, be annoyed by it. And we can find ourselves losing control over that suppression occasionally, and it then comes exploding out. The other thing, sometimes we need help in suppressing this emotion. There's things we might need to do to make sure it doesn't enter into our consciousness. I think this is a good way to think about addictions to substances that numb, or substances that kind of displace any negative feelings with more feelings of elation. But there are other things we can do to try to keep these emotions out. Stay busy all the time, become a workaholic, develop other addictions that maybe aren't substances but are behavioral, like gambling or watching porn. And the dissociative process is not just a mental one. It's not simply not allowing something to be there in our awareness. Because emotions are embodied, because they are physiological, as they're felt in our bodies, suppressing them means we have to disavow parts of our body, certain sensations in our body. We get off from our body. We can become rigid, excuse me, or numb in a lot of ways. If we're dissociated from our own emotions, then it can really compromise our ability to be present with other people in their emotions, to tolerate their emotions, be it anger or sadness, to even recognize it. It can compromise our capacity for empathy. So there's a lot of good reasons why we should pay attention to the possibility that we're dissociating from undesired emotions. It needs to be said that there's a reason, if there's an evolutionary reason for emotions, there's probably also a good evolutionary reason for dissociation. We can't, as we've evolved, I'm sure there were times when we couldn't indulge our feelings. We had to get on with doing what was necessary to survive. And if we're in a traumatic environment, as a child, abusive parents, it may be that we've learned to dissociate as an adaptive strategy. We don't want our system, our mind, to be overwhelmed. We've got to somehow isolate that bit and keep it at bay. So it's not just a mistake, but it is a problem. And if it goes too far and too long, there are costs to be paid. So what is integration? If we're not going down the dissociative path, how are we then relating to our emotions? Fundamentally, we're feeling them, we're experiencing them, we acknowledge them, we don't ignore them, We don't deny them. We don't minimize them. Whatever they are. Whatever they are. And no emotion is specially excluded from this. That if we're really working at integrating ourselves emotionally, it means if we feel shame, we acknowledge that. We may need to do something about it. If we're overwhelmed with grief and sadness, we feel that. If we're angry to the point of rage, we feel that. We taste that. We touch that. But from a slight distance. It's like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You reflect on it. You have the emotion rather than be had by it. We may have the space to ask questions, to be curious about the emotion. We can think, what's actually provoking this? What has happened that's resulted in me having this feeling? And we can reflect on various reasons why that might be so. Something somebody said. Are we aware of our needs and what need we didn't have met that resulted in having this emotion come up in us? What is the emotion for? What's the best way to make use of this emotion? What is it motivating me to possibly do? Is it motivating me to seek support and comfort from another? Is it asking me to set boundaries and limits? Is it telling me that I'm in real danger and I need to remove myself? Is it telling me that there's a good reason I can't trust my partner? We can also reflect on what thoughts, what beliefs underlie this feeling. Maybe we've misinterpreted an event or somebody's words or actions, and it's resulted in this feeling. Maybe we've responded in a habitual way to something that reminds us of an earlier experience in our life when this is a new situation, and those old interpretations aren't valid here. Anyway, so there's a differentiation, so we're not fused with it. We feel it, but we reflect on it. Through that reflection, we can choose a course of action. I think I've mentioned this before. From integral theory comes the notion that development entails a process of transcending and including. So in order for anything to be transcended, it first has to be differentiated. The self, the awareness, our basic awareness has to be differentiated from the thing we're observing. And we include it, right? Dissociation is differentiation, it's transcending but not including. It's the idea that I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to cut this off and it's not going to be there. That leads to problems. Transcend and include with emotions means I'm not ruled by them. I'm not identified with them. I'm having them. They're me, but they're only a part of me. And my greater self, my greater awareness can begin to orchestrate what I do with that rather than just be subject to impulsively acting it out. I hope this makes sense. It points to a few things, that it's important to know the difference between dissociation and integration, and not assume that what you need to do is completely plunge into your emotions. And you know this. If you're somebody who's been overwhelmed by your emotions, you know this. Or maybe this is for other people who assume that's the only problem, is suppression. Here's one more thing to keep in mind. If we've suppressed a lot of emotions, it may be that part of the process of reclaiming them is allowing ourselves to identify with them, allowing ourselves some space to fuse with them and to embody them in a safe space. That could be therapy, but not to stay there. Not to stay there. Just to make sure you know what it feels like. You know that you're angry and what it feels like in your body. You know that you have deep grief and what that feels like in your body. So yeah, you can immerse and identify temporarily. Try it on. Be it. And then differentiate again. Okay. Well, may you find your way with all of the feelings you're going to have today, tomorrow, in the future. May you not remain fused with your emotions. May you only dissociate when you must for survival. May you find the means and the awareness to differentiate and integrate those feelings. And let them enrich your life. Let them give you strong motivation to do all the things that you need to do in order to be and to become who you want to be. Celebrate your emotions. And may you not be incontinent or constipated. May you have regular emotional bowel movements. Sorry. All right. Take care. Toodaloo.